Coming in at number 5, we have boiling water. This post came from a Reddit user 6 years ago. In his post, he explained how he passed away, visited hell, and then was brought back to life. It all started in the summer of 2003. He was visiting his cousin when they went to visit his friend's house. His friends, who were two sisters named Erica and Angela, had a pool at their house, so they decided this would be a great way to enjoy the day. The guy couldn't swim, but he didn't want to tell anyone this and risk being humiliated in front of the girls, so he instead decided he would stay to the shallow end of the pool. It was all going well, they were enjoying the day, and his inability to swim hadn't been obvious up to this point. When the sisters went inside to get them something to eat, his cousin suggested they play volleyball in the pool. They didn't have a net, but they made it work. They were both enjoying the game until his cousin hit the ball at a weird angle and he dove to catch it. Suddenly felt the incline of the pool and slipped under the water. He felt himself fall further and further until he couldn't keep his head above the water. He heard his cousin screaming as he fell under for the last time. He knew his cousin wouldn't be able to pull his weight alone. The next thing he knew, he was sat at what appeared to be a desk in a white room that seemed to be endless. He could hear voices all around him, but none speaking English, so he didn't know what they were saying. Suddenly the desk disappeared and the room went dark. A man appeared before him dressed in a suit with pearly white teeth and an unsettling smile. As he approached him, the guy asked, "Where am I?" The man, still smiling, answered, "Oh, you'll figure that out. Bad luck with the pool, I see." At that moment, the guy realized he was floating in water. It was so still he hadn't even noticed. The man was standing above the water looking down on the guy when he asked, "Am I dead? Are you God?" He explained he was not, he was just going to watch him swim for a while. He realized he suddenly knew how to swim. He felt free and enjoyed it. He was laughing and loving the experience until suddenly the water got hotter. Kept getting hotter and hotter until it was boiling. The man had disappeared, but he could hear him laughing. He said the water was throwing him around as it boiled hotter and hotter. It felt like it went on for years. He was begging for it to stop or for any small relief from the pain. It felt like eons had passed. Suddenly he began to raise higher in the water and felt pain in his chest. He began to cough and felt a surge of water leave his lungs. It was a relief. His vision was blurry and he did not recognize the man standing above him. He thought he was in a new hell until he saw his cousin with tears in his eyes looking over him. He was back. They explained his heart had stopped for 3 minutes. He said this still haunts his mind. Those 3 minutes felt like an eternity. Coming in at number 4, we have Second Chance. A woman who goes by Stephanie tells the story of how she believes she was given a second chance in her life. She had a near-death experience. As she was passing away, she recalls seeing her entire life flash before her eyes. She felt like she was falling backwards for an eternity. She saw every mistake she had ever made. She was then taken to a nightmarish landscape. She believed it was hell. She said she fell until she was in the city where she grew up, but it looked as though it had been destroyed by something. She had an overwhelming fear that she was in the presence of evil. She had been shown her mistake and what awaited her. She was then suddenly thrown back into her body. She felt grateful to be alive. She had been shown what would happen to her if she didn't change her life. She thinks this was a warning of where she would spend eternity if she didn't. To be honest, I'm going to hell. Coming in at number 3, we have Hellfire. The author of Hope Stewart wrote a book about her experience visiting hell. She also explained in her book steps to follow if you never want to experience it yourself. It goes against everything I just said. She claims to have visited hell twice within the space of 2 years. It seems that she believes she was taken there as a way of getting her to teach the world to avoid the experience. She said it happened while she was asleep, like she was being allowed to visit while in a dream state. There was no night or day at a time at all. It was in a time of its own. She said the landscape looked like a million jumbo jets crashed into one place. She said the scene was incredible, beyond anything anyone could imagine. The people there had nowhere to go, they all had to be here. Everyone there was in the same position, wailing and screaming, weeping for help, but none was given. She commented on how everyone there was equal. No one had fancy cars or big houses or money. They all just burned in the same way. She said it was the saddest thing she had ever witnessed. It was heart-wrenching and she would do anything to make sure people don't have to experience this. She now wants to bring awareness to this and to stop anyone from living in a way where they might end up there. In at number 2, we have near-death experience. Most visits to hell come from a near-death experience, and this one is no different. Kim revealed that her NDE happened 30 years ago, but she can remember it clearer than any other memory in her life. It made her change her life dramatically and live better. Kim went into a 4-day coma after she made some bad choices with her life. She woke up as she reached the doorsteps of hell. She said that she could hear the screams of the devil from inside outside the gates. She said that the smell in the air was rancid at best. It smelled like burning flesh of some kind. Suddenly she was unable to move. She felt claws and teeth attaching to all parts of her body. The pain was unimaginable, but it wouldn't stop. She couldn't scream or get away. She could see her arms and legs being pulled away, but the experience felt endless. It was as if the pain was on a loop. Her arms would be pulled off again and again. As the suffering went beyond limits, she suddenly came back to life. She was finally resuscitated after 4 days of attempts from the doctors. Many doctors insist that she cannot have experienced what she says, but she'll never forget the pain. And finally, in at number 1, we have Glimpse of Hell. A woman named Jacqueline shared her story of when she thinks she visited hell. She titled it, "I think I've seen a glimpse of hell, and I think it saw me too." Creepy. She explained that her day started as normal as any other. She said every day she would ride her bike to visit her father at work. Her mother would tell her to be careful as the road they lived on was known for being dangerous. She had to cross 4 lanes of traffic to get over the road. It didn't bother her, she did it every day. This day when she pulled out to cross the road, everything went black. The last thing she heard was her mother screaming. She always watched from the front porch. She heard the squeak of tires and car horns. She felt a horrible pain down the left side of her body. The next thing she knew, everything went dark and quiet like she was sleeping. Then she woke up, but she wasn't in the world she knew. It appeared like she was on the same street, in the same town. Everything looked abandoned. The world felt completely silent. The trees looked dead and the sky was burnt orange color. Not knowing what to do, she ran home. Her head hurt and her stomach felt twisted. When she got home, her lunch was still on the table, but it was rotten. She heard something upstairs coming from her mother's room. She ran upstairs looking for the comfort of her mother. As she got to the door, she froze. The door was not fully open, but she could see the thing imitating her mother on the bed. It was moving around like a puppet, jerking back and forth. It looked like it was part of her mother, part of something else. The floorboard beneath her creaked. The thing turned to look at her and the door began to open. All of a sudden she was pulled back and she woke up. Actually woke up in a hospital bed. Her mother was beside her as she woke up, crying and explaining what had happened. She said that the doctors brought her back. It was a miracle. She should have succumbed to her injuries. She had a fracture in her neck and a spinal injury. She didn't tell anyone what she saw. She thought it must be a hallucination, but there was one problem. She saw the creature again. She started to see it frequently. First it started far away on bridges or inside buildings, but it got closer and closer until it would be stood behind her. If she moved to look at it, it would disappear. The worst part was it was always people she knew and loved, her mother, father, siblings. She was even scared of real people. She doesn't know where she went, but she thinks it was hell or her version of it. The creature saw her and it hadn't let her go since. It's like she was never meant to wake up.
Number 5 on this list is Victoria Gallant. This is a story from a Reddit user who had a very close near-death experience. Victoria, who was living in a small town called Hammark at the time, was going on a walk through nature. She was passing by a pond when she saw what looked to be a duck struggling in the water. Its wing was beaten and bloodied and it was drowning. Something came over her and she says that she felt she needed to help it. She tried to grab a long branch and reach out to it so it could have something to grab onto, but as she was reaching out though, she slipped and hit the back of her head on the rock she was standing on, knocking her completely unconscious. What followed is one of the weirdest descriptions of hell that I've ever read. She says that it felt as if she was in an experimental film. An indie project with no script or storyline to go off of, just weird images flying on the screen. Nothing made sense in this hell dimension that she was in, but she knew that it wasn't safe. Rather than have one god stare down on her, she said that there were many. Massive gods too, who were so tall that they might not have been able to see their own feet. She was falling this entire time before she was finally caught by something thick and silky, a massive spider web. She was stuck now and couldn't move if she wanted to. In front of her was this half spider, half human, demon looking thing looking as if Victoria was about to be its next meal. Before the spider could pounce though, a light appeared in the distance and she woke up. This has been a life-changing event for her, and after some deep therapy, getting over her newfound fear of spiders has actually helped her enjoy her day-to-day experiences a little bit more. She kept stressing in her post that there was no story, no narrative in this weird world. Nothing made sense at all and everything felt out of sorts. This is super different from our classic fiery hell universe with demons, and honestly it's a little bit more scary. I personally can't imagine how it would have been to be part of something like that and just have no idea what's happening ever. One positive from this story though is that apparently the duck she was trying to save did eventually get to safety, so at least we can hold on to that, guys. Number 4 on this list is Ian McCormick. Ian McCormick thought it was over for him. The doctors thought it was over for him. Any expert on his injuries would have thought it would have been over for him, but it wasn't. Ian got stung by a very deadly jellyfish that sent him to the emergency room. He got there late though, and it looked as if he wasn't gonna make it. He lost consciousness and said that he went somewhere he didn't expect. You see, it wasn't just black for Ian as some people report when they visit the other side. There was a bit more. He's quoted saying that there was something else there. I could feel a cold, eerie feeling as though something or someone was looking at me. He doesn't know what that thing was, but believes in his heart it was evil, whatever it could have been. He was in this dark, scary void for what felt like an eternity and kept praying to get out of it. He said that he prayed to God and God answered those prayers. While he was down there, a bright light illuminated the entire void he was in and filled him with warmth. Then a hand, shrouded in light, reached out and grabbed his arm and pulled him back from the dead. This is how he described it, and apparently it was such a harrowing journey that he's dedicated his entire life afterwards to informing people about this tale and guiding them to God. I personally find it really interesting that hell for Ian, as he describes it, was a dark void filled with cold. It kind of reminds me of what space would be like if you had a massive unknown entity just watching you and stalking your every movement. If that is truly what hell is, then that's almost more scary than the fiery demon city that we always picture. At least if you were in that fire land, there would be others there with you as well. But can you imagine just floating around this dark, cold, empty void for eternity all by yourself? That might be the worst punishment imaginable, and I can totally understand how coming back from that would change your life forever. Number 3 on this list is Jennifer PEREZ. Jennifer's story is really unique because in her experience she saw what both sides are like. Answers writes, Jennifer PEREZ was another young Christian who had a shocking experience with hell while she slipped in and out of consciousness. Unlike Bill Wise and Kenneth Hagin, Jennifer was first led to heaven and then to hell. She recalls finding herself standing ashamed in front of God. She acknowledged the fact that although she claimed to be a Christian, she failed to show the fruit of her faith. After this interaction, Jennifer recalls the feeling of falling. As she continued to fall, she felt her surroundings becoming hotter and hotter. She felt an unquenchable thirst as she smelled the intense smell of sulfur. Many of the other things she shares in her accounts are similar to others, including torture, demons, screams of agony. Fortunately, Jennifer's life was spared, and she went on to share her story in hopes of warning individuals who were lost or had grown lukewarm in their faith. Wow, I cannot even imagine the feeling of falling into hell as you literally watch your life slip away from you like that. Jennifer's description of hell is very much like the classic storybook definition. Red fire everywhere, demons flying around, those who were unworthy to go to heaven getting punished for the sins they committed while they were alive. Obviously not the ideal spot to spend the remainder of your existence. The story doesn't say how she got spared, if she was just falling and then woke up coming back to life, but I think it's really interesting how she almost got into heaven and then was turned away. No wonder she's dedicated the rest of her life to restoring her faith in God and in others. Number 2 on this list is Tamara LaRue. At the young age of 15, Tamara LaRue attempted to take her own life. She felt herself leave her body as she fell at an unstoppable speed and remembers entering a space of darkness with absolutely no light. She saw a fiery pit as she took in her surroundings, screaming in complete agony. Tamara remembers seeing thousands of others around her, yet feeling a sense of total isolation. Miraculously, Tamara felt a bright hand carry her up to heaven, after which she found herself back in her home. She survived her attempt to take her own life in what the doctors could only describe as a miracle, and has spent the remainder of her life teaching people about the reality of hell. That was a passage from Answers detailing Tamara's account with hell. I found another story detailing her account with death as well, and it describes how she saw hundreds of souls screaming and crying out in agony for help. Imagine how horrible that must have been. To be stuck in hell, crying out for eternity for somebody to save you or just end your suffering. It's no wonder that Tamara has written 2 books talking about this experience and the blessing that is our lives. Moral of this story and other ones, guys, is that enjoy today, enjoy tomorrow, and pretty much all the days that you have in your life, because one day we could end up there. And finally, number 1 on this list is Howard Storm. Wikipedia writes, in June 1985, Storm took a group of his students on a field trip to Europe. After returning to his Paris hotel room with his wife around 11 a.m. from a morning excursion, he had a sudden onset of severe abdominal pain. He was evaluated at the Paris hospital and diagnosed with a duodenal perforation, which required surgery. The earliest a surgeon could perform this procedure was around 9 p.m. that day. As he lay waiting for surgery, he truly believed that he was going to die due to the severity of his pain, and so mentally prepared himself for death. After saying goodbye to his wife, he eventually passed out. Storm reports the following subconscious experience. He opened his eyes and found himself standing outside of his body, looking down at the hospital bed with his wife crying beside him. He was without pain and hypersensitive. His wife could not see or hear him. He was then drawn by voices calling his name outside the hospital room, and he followed them, believing they were taking him to a doctor. He describes pale humanoid creatures that urged him down the hallway, saying they had been waiting for him. The creatures became increasingly hostile, and when he refused to continue following them, they began to attack him. He then heard a voice saying, "Pray to God," and so he recited fragments of Bible verses and the Pledge of Allegiance. With the mention of the word God, the creatures would retract, and eventually he was alone again. After a period of time, he called out for Jesus to save him, and suddenly was rescued by spiritual beings of light. Pale, humanoid, hostile figures. This sounds a lot like Howard was on his way to hell and seeing what I can only imagine are a form of demon. Some other reports of his experience talk about how he started to feel horrible pain all over his body. It felt as if there was going to be endless torment coming and that there was no escape. This experience was enough to turn Howard into a devout Catholic from an atheist. Apparently, he believes God was the only thing that saved him from currently being in this demonic hell.
Coming in at number 5, we have 23 Minutes. Bill Wise, who is now an author, had a life-changing experience in November of 1998. It changed the course of his life and career forever. Bill is a devout Christian and believes in both heaven and hell. In an event that he compares to that of a dream, he described the experience of being plunged into hell. He said he felt like he was falling down a long tunnel. He was falling for what felt like an eternity of time. Finally, he hit a solid floor. When he looked around, he realized he was in a dark, dirty prison cell. He said people often wonder if hell is hot or cold. From his experience, he felt such an intense heat that seemed far too hot for life to even survive. When looking around the prison cell he had been dropped into, he realized there were 2 large creatures in there with him. While he was there, he witnessed other prisoners being pulled from their cell to be put through unimaginable pain. He could hear screaming from all directions, foul odors from beasts around him, and raging pits of fire. He said after what felt like eons being trapped there, he saw a bright light above him. He then felt himself rising up and out of the tunnel he had fallen through to land here. Following his vision, Bill believed it was his life calling to share his experience with the rest of the world. After spreading his message as much as he was able, he wrote the book 23 Minutes in Hell. What felt like eons for him to experience was only 23 minutes once he was back in his mortal body. He will never forget his experience and hopes he will never be back there ever again. Coming in at number 4, we have near-death experience. Kenneth Hagin was born and raised in a family who followed Christian beliefs. When he was 15, he had a terrifying experience that led him to dedicate his life to the Lord and become a reverend. Kenneth suffered from a chronic heart condition, and when he was 15, his heart stopped beating. He recalled a numbness spreading throughout his entire body. He then began to descend down. He was going further and further down, as if he was going deeper and deeper into a dark cave or well. There was no light around him as he descended. He said he looked up and could see the lights of the earth, but they were completely out of reach. They too faded away until he was completely surrounded by darkness. The darkness was unlike anything he had ever seen before. As he got further and further down, he came across great flames of fire. For a moment, he even felt relieved to be out of the complete darkness, but this feeling didn't last long. He then started to feel the heat. It got hotter and hotter, and he felt as though he could not breathe. It was so unbearable. Some demonic creatures noticed his presence and began to approach him. Fortunately for him, the doctors were able to save him from this hell. They restarted his heart and he felt his soul return to his body. Since then, he served God. He now works as a pastor to spread the word of the horrors that he witnessed. Coming in at number 3, we have 27 Days. Matthew Botsford, unlike the others mentioned, was someone who didn't believe in religion or followed any faith or God. He had a horrific accident and was put into a medically induced coma to save his life following him being involved in a shooting. When Matthew did finally recover, he told the story of what he had experienced while in his coma. He said the second he heard the bang, he felt utter darkness. He then felt like he was in a void. He tried to scream, but he realized that he couldn't. He felt incredible fear, but there was nothing he could do to break free from the invisible hold that had come over him. He said he believed that it was hell. It was beyond anything he could describe. He suddenly felt like he was dropped from that hold and he started to fall a great distance. As he fell, he got faster and faster. He knew if he was to hit anything at this speed, it would be fatal. Still not understanding where he was or what was going on, his brain scrambled for ideas but nothing came to him. He hit solid ground, but he didn't feel pain that he had expected. He got up on his feet waiting for whatever would happen to him next. He began to run in any direction he could in the dark void room he had fallen into. Suddenly he saw a creature in the distance. He said it was tall, with no features on its face. It looked like what he could only imagine was a demon. He ran in fear, but no matter where he turned, there it was, walking towards him, getting closer and closer. Finally, it reached him. Frozen in fear, all he could do now was look into the creature's void face as it reached out to touch him. The moment before it touched him, he felt a tightness in his chest and he woke up. He said the experience was more vivid than any dream he had ever had. He had experienced things he didn't believe his brain was able to create on its own. He was shocked to learn he had been in a coma for 27 days. It felt like he was in that place for a year, but only minutes at the same time. He said he'll never forget this horrifying experience. Coming in at number 2, we have Ghost. Howard Stern had been a devout atheist for most of his life until he had an experience that changed his mind and opened him up to the belief that something else was out there. At the age of 38, he suffered a perforated stomach. This caused him to have a near-death experience. He crashed in the hospital, and the next thing he knew, he was stood next to his hospital bed. He could see his family and the doctors around him trying to save his life, but as he spoke to them, no one could hear him. When he tried to grab them, his hand fell right through. He was starting to panic and fell back, not knowing what to do. Then he saw a group of people at the door to his room. They were calling him over. Shocked that these people could see him, he walked over. They smiled and told him to follow them. As soon as he passed the doorway, he was surrounded by a thick fog. The people began to walk further and further down what was the hallway. He followed them. As he walked, he could see his room in the distance as it got further and further away. The people were being joyful and friendly as they told him to follow. This gave him hope that they were trustworthy. Trust no one. As they got further and further away from his room, their attitude began to change. They started to push and shove. The next thing he knew, their faces had completely changed. They looked demonic. They began to feast on one another's flesh, fighting each other. He cowered on the ground, not sure what to do, when he heard a voice in his head. The voice was his own and it told him to pray to God. He screamed, "I don't know how." Having never prayed before, it was not something he felt comfortable doing, but he was desperate to escape the place. He began to throw out phrases he had heard here and there. He shouted, "Our Father who art in heaven," and "one nation under God." He repeated these again and again. Suddenly, it worked. He was back in his body in the hospital bed. Since then, he questioned everything he had once known. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Trip to Hell. Dr. George Ritchie's experience happened in 1943 during World War II. He had temporarily passed due to pneumonia. He woke up in a hospital room. After noticing all of his belongings had gone, he decided to get up to look around. As soon as he stood up, he noticed that someone was lying in his bed. He did think this was odd as he had just gotten out of bed, but instead of wondering what was going on, he decided to leave. He wanted to get home. He stepped out into the hallway and out of the metal doors. Even though his home was miles away from where he was in the hospital, he decided to run back to his hometown. Again, in a strange way that he didn't think about at the time, he was there within minutes, faster than any train, plane or car would be able to carry him. On his way, he happened upon a small town with a decrepit red cafe. At this point, the doctor had not even considered that he had died or that all of these events were very strange. While looking up at the cafe from the path, a man crossed his path. He shouted over to him, but the man didn't respond. He didn't even glance over, it was like he didn't hear him at all. The doctor went over to tap him on the shoulder. His hand fell right through the body like he was made of nothing but air. In this moment, his whole life flashed before his eyes and he realized it was his body lying in the hospital bed. He turned back around as fast as he could back to the hospital. Once there, he found his room, looked over his body. It was then a dark figure appeared to him. He felt like he had to go with him, even though he knew he didn't want to. He was not taken straight to hell, but rather shown different versions of it. He was asked to choose his hell. The first looked just like Earth. The living and dead lived side by side. Only the living didn't know the dead were there, and they couldn't interact with anything in the world. He saw a bar where people were having drinks, and the dead were desperately trying to grab something to drink, but they weren't able to. It seems these souls will live forever, being unable to grasp the things they once loved. The next was like nothing he had seen. It was a large, desolate plain. It looked like the souls here were fighting over what little they had. They seemed angry and alone. He knew he didn't want to be in this place either. As he was confronted with his choice, he suddenly woke up. He told people of what he had seen, tried to make sense of what happened. He was scared he would one day have to make that final choice, and still, he didn't know which one was worse.